everyone. Welcome to the Super Feeler podcast. My name is Lori, and I am joined today by Mercedes, who is going to be sharing a little bit about her story. And if you haven't already picked up her book, Tulips is her poetry collection. I highly recommend it. It's so beautifully done, and a fellow Canadian. So really happy to have you. And if you're watching the video version, either on Instagram or Patreon, our lipstick matches, which is hilarious and a total fluke. So Mercedes, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself generally?
Sure. So I'm kind of a writer first. I got my start in poetry. I also do like some marketing and stuff like that, and a little bit of photography these days. And then I have like kind of a long mental health story since I was a kid. I've been dealing with it for a long time. So that kind of shows up in my work a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your mental health story, like generally, and then we can get into the details?
So like diagnostically, I have depression, anxiety, and BPD. So kind of a mix of different things, as well as like some substance abuse issues. But so I've had anxiety, or was diagnosed with anxiety as early as like 6 or 7. And that's how I kind of got started in like treatment and things like that. Did a little bit of, I think, CBT at the time when I was a kid. And then content notice for suicidal ideation. But I started dealing with that when I was around 10 or 11 years old. So I definitely had like some symptoms of BPD like showing up pretty early on. And then I didn't really get diagnosed until I was about 17 or 18, like with the stuff other than anxiety. So I was hospitalized a lot when I was in my like teens and early 20s. A lot of inpatient treatment and things like that. Got diagnosed with BPD a little later than the depression, so maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And that was a big shift for me. It kind of helped me figure out what was going on and how to actually like treat it properly. So
Totally. Yeah, I feel like that's the case for so many people.
Yeah.
Did you know what BPD was at the time?
I don't think I did. No, it was someone that I dated actually for a little while. They studied psychology, and I had just been describing an experience to them, and they're like, "Oh, that doesn't really sound like depression. Like that sounds like BPD, actually." And nobody had ever really like pointed that out to me. So I ended up asking like a psychiatrist next time I was hospitalized, and they were like, "Yeah, you probably do have BPD," and no one ever really told me along the way, even though it had been discussed apparently throughout my treatment journey. But it was a big missing piece of the puzzle for me. Like it really helped me become more self-aware and like get into the right treatment.
Totally, which is so frustrating that like you had to bring it up and then they were like, yeah, actually, probably. It's like, well, maybe tell me that next time. Like, that would be good to know. Do you have anything else written down that maybe I should know about myself? Oh my goodness. I hear that so often though, like, which is so frustrating. In Tulips, the poetry collection, I actually think it's the first poem, which is called Tulips, if I remember correctly. It sounds like an involuntary hospitalization that you had experienced. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if that one was involuntary or voluntary. I've had both. I've experienced both. Most of the time, I don't think it was involuntary. I would often bring myself to the hospital. And so they didn't often, like they formed me sometimes, but I wasn't always formed. So I was usually like a lot of the time I was seeking the care. So it wasn't necessarily like people forcing me into it at those moments. I'm not sure. Sorry for the poem. I can't remember in particular.
Oh no, all
if it
good.
was voluntary or not. Yeah.
I might have just been reading between the lines like a bit incorrectly, but I'm so curious about, because you're in Ontario, I'm in British Columbia. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Canadian geography, it was so funny. I had a super feeler reach out to me today and be like, "Are you near Quebec?" And I was like, "No,
not at all.
I'm very far from Quebec." We're on opposite sides of the province, of the country, basically.
Yeah.
So, and Canada's massive. How has it been for you? You said you sought out a lot of treatment yourself. You went to the hospital on your own.
Yeah.
Was that a positive experience? Was that a helpful experience? Was that easy to navigate?
Hospitalization was tricky. Like it had its ups and downs. I found it to be really dehumanizing at times and traumatic in its own ways, especially the involuntary hospitalization times. But it did help me a lot. So it's really a mixed bag. Like I feel like I did grow and learn a lot of skills and things about myself in hospitalization and in treatment, inpatient treatment. But it has a really difficult layer to it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that quite a bit of, like, obviously involuntary treatment is like a controversial topic overall, but I have heard from a lot of people that have had involuntary care that have been like, I did need it, right? Like, I didn't like it at the time, but I did need it. Yeah. So do you have any thoughts on like what kind of brought you to this place in the world? Like, you have anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder. Do you just like generally have an idea of like where this came from or how long you've experienced BPD symptoms for?
Yeah, I think BPD probably showed up around the time I started getting the suicidal ideation, I think. So I'd say maybe like 10 or 11, but probably I had symptoms even before that, honestly, with my personality. But yeah, I think it's a combination of factors. Mental illness and addiction runs on both sides of my family, but there also was some trauma growing up that I dealt with that I think contributed to it as well. So for me, I think it was kind of a mix of that, like biological and trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, as it is for so many people, right?
Yeah.
And what role did addiction play in your journey?
It was interesting because so I use like medical cannabis. I have it prescribed for my mental health. But for a long time, everyone was telling me like, "Oh, the cannabis is the problem, and like you're not going to get better until you stop using cannabis and all this stuff." And nobody really talked to me about the drinking. Like it was maybe brought up by one psychiatrist to maybe put me on a medication, but nobody really focused on it. And once I got the prescription for the cannabis, I started doing it very methodically and like realizing, there's a way to do it that was really responsible. And then I kind of realized, oh, this alcohol thing is like a huge problem. Like it's very destabilizing. And I was binging very often, like almost every weekend. I've been on medication for a long time. So the medication with the alcohol really didn't mix well. So yeah, it wasn't until I finally got the medical cannabis prescription that I was able to realize that the alcohol was a really big like problem and a destabilizing force, like especially when I was dealing with suicidal ideation. Having that mix with the alcohol is just a really dangerous combo for some people, and me included. I had 4.5 years of sobriety from alcohol, and then I actually relapsed last year. So I've been kind of going back and forth and back and forth. But now I'm about a little over 100 days alcohol free
Amazing.
again. Thank you.
Congrats.
Thank you. So it's been a journey. Like it's been up and down and back and forth, and but it's helped a lot to look at my alcohol use and to try to limit it and to understand the addiction a little more. Yeah.
Yeah, and so interesting that nobody ever brought that up, right? Because if you were doing like meth every weekend, they would think it's a huge issue, right? But obviously alcohol is just like so part of society and people don't really realize that it can be so harmful, right?
Yeah,
I was talking to someone the other day and they don't drink, and I basically don't drink. Like I drink on occasion, but very, very rarely. And so we, if we're ever going out for dinner or whatever, we're always the two looking at the mocktails and whatever. And I was like, oh, like, do you mind me asking why don't you drink out of curiosity? Right. Like I don't ask that to random people, but I know this person pretty well. And she was like, oh, I'm on a couple medications and like I'm not supposed to drink with them. And I was like, I feel like everybody's on medication that they're not supposed to drink with.
It's true.
You just actually listened to your doctor. That's amazing. I thought it was so funny. But yeah, totally. I mean, like it's not definitely good for you. And to have an addiction that is so ingrained in like every social activity in the world and like advertised on TV and like that just must be so challenging.
It can be. Yeah. I think once you get into more like long-term sobriety, those sorts of things get a little easier, like being in bars or being at events where people are drinking. It can get easier over time, but at the beginning it's very tricky. Yeah.
And I think like at least in BC, I don't know about Toronto, but like or Niagara or wherever, but the there's a lot of like sober curious movement happening around here. So many like sober events and like mocktail menus are incredible now. And so I hope that over time that gets a lot easier. I think people will start to realize that like, oh, I'm literally poisoning myself all the time just for fun. Like, so why am I doing this? Yeah.
So true. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, have you been to DBT, like treatment? What kind of stuff have you gone through in that sense?
Yeah, I did a lot of CBT in the beginning
Hmm.
because I thought it was just depression and anxiety.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of CBT, and it was like, oh, why isn't this working? Why am I having no response to this treatment? Like maybe a little bit, but not nothing significant. It wasn't until I got that BPD diagnosis that I was then referred to DBT groups. So I did, I think, two groups. I did one 4 week and one 8 or 9 week group.
Oh, those are
Um,
short.
yeah, not too long. The 4 week one actually made the biggest difference.
Hmm.
It was huge, and yeah, it like totally changed my life. Like doing DBT, I'd always done mindfulness and stuff like that, but I'd never really taken it as seriously or appreciated how much it could help my recovery. So yeah, the DBT gave me a lot of skills and made a huge difference. Yeah, in my recovery overall.
So for like the 4-week program, was that every day?
No, I think it was once or twice a week or something like that.
Wild that it made such a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
it may be 4 or 6, but it wasn't very long, and, yeah, it made a huge difference for me, yeah.
But what made the difference? Like, what was so impactful in your life?
Um, I think it was a group of people who I think either had BPD diagnoses or had maybe complex PTSD diagnoses. So I think
Very
dealing with
similar, yeah.
talking with folks who were going through similar experiences helped a lot. Understanding like it wasn't just me, and this wasn't just like a defect in my personality or something. Or I had always just thought that these symptoms of BPD were just part of who I was, and that I didn't really understand that like these were things that I could really work on and change and grow and learn to live with in better ways. So yeah, it was like kind of the DBT and also just the learning about BPD in the process, I guess, as well.
Yeah, honestly, I think the big benefit for a lot of people is that kind of peer support, informal looking at yourself in a mirror and being like, "Oh my God, is this what I'm like?" And
Yeah,
I feel validated and not
yeah,
alone and all that. Yeah,
totally.
it's so important. So sorry, when did you get diagnosed? 18, 19, you said?
No, that was the depression. Sorry, that I
Oh,
got
right. Okay.
diagnosed around then. And then BPD, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years later than that.
Okay. And how old are you now?
I'm 29.
Okay. So you got
Yeah.
diagnosed at like 24, 25-ish,
Yeah,
give or
something
take.
like that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what does life look like for you now in terms of your emotions and regulation
It's
and that kind of
very
thing?
different. Yeah, like I mean, I obviously still struggle and I have difficult moments and, I get overwhelmed by my emotions at times, but it's like night and day. Like when I was a teenager or like early 20s, I was pretty much suicidal on a daily basis. Like it was like really intense suicidal ideation just pretty much constantly. And yeah, I mean, now it's more something that comes up in difficult moments. So when I do get those really strong emotions, I still deal with suicidal ideation at times, but it's not really a daily thing. I haven't been an inpatient for I'd say several years. Like I've been to the ER for some consults and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
actually like admitted to a unit, it's been a very long time. And there was a period where I was just like being admitted maybe 2-3 times a month. Like it was a lot of
Wow,
hospitalization. Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
lot.
yeah,
Yeah, and that in itself is destabilizing. I mean, obviously happy that those resources were there and that you were able to access them, but
for sure.
yeah, just kind of having to go in and out and in and out is
Yeah,
hard. Was the DBT service part of that you did go through? Was that part of like Ontario Health or like was it covered?
it was covered, thankfully.
Okay,
There's
good.
really long waiting lists here for the programs, but once you are able to get through or get on through the list or whatever, it is usually covered. At least the groups. I found that
Right, yeah.
individual DBT is not typically covered, but they really do have a lot of groups and stuff like that. So yeah, thankfully, both of the times I did DBT in a group setting, they were covered. Yeah, thankfully.
Yeah, that's great. And has medication played a role in your life at all?
Yeah, it's been a huge thing as well. Yeah, finding the right combination has been huge and very stabilizing in my life. I went through a lot of medications. I don't really respond to SSRIs or SSNRIs or really a lot of the typical medications. So I went through a lot of rounds of like trying to find the right one. And now I'm on a combination of, I think I'm on 3 or 4 medications. three of them are mental health meds, and then one of them is for the addiction, like craving medication. So yeah, in both respects, the medication has also helped in a huge way. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, finding that right combination is journey
Yes.
in itself. Like, and especially I don't do great on SSRIs either for like various weird reasons. Like I had this one time where first of all, I swear some of them give me really bad acne.
Oh no.
Bizarre. And doctors are like, well, it's not a side effect. And I'm like, well, every time I take this SSRI, I get really bad acne, and the rest of the time my skin is perfect. So I don't know what to tell you. And then I had one where I had this side effect that they at first were like, this isn't correct, like whatever. And then they looked it up and they're like, oh, weird. This is like a very, very rare side effect. And I think it was Prozac. I had to pee every like 20 minutes.
Oh no, that's so
like,
hard.
It was so bad. And like this was pre-COVID. So I'd be like in meetings in real life and like had to pee 3 times in a 1-hour meeting.
Oh no,
and
that's so
it was
difficult.
like wild. Yeah, it was, right? And so anyways, just like such weird side effects. And then but they're always the frontline treatment.
Right.
So you've probably gone through, like probably both of us have gone through like combined at least like 15, 20 SSRIs would be my guess. Yeah. And then they're like, oh, let's try SNRIs or let's try mood stabilizers. And yeah, wouldn't it be nice? I met someone, I can't remember who it was. I think it was somebody that I interviewed for the podcast, and they were just like, yeah, and then I've tried one mental health medication and it worked and it's been great and I've been on it for years. And I'm like, do you know how rare that is? Like that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Good for you. I'm thrilled.
Like that. Yeah. I'm just like, wow, that's amazing.
Totally. This is the exact opposite of my experience. Like I was just recording earlier today with someone and I was realizing that I think I've been on like mental health medications on and off for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Because I started when I was like, I think 11 or 12, right?
Yeah.
I'm 31 now. And I was like, oh my God, that is unbelievable. The amount of times that I've had to switch medications in 20 years just to try and find the right combination. It's just kind of wild.
It is.
Yeah. And so you write so beautifully about your experiences. And just, it's so funny. There's so many beautiful BPD poets out there. And I have never been a poetry person. I've never like been a consumer of poetry or a writer of poetry.
Yeah.
But I obviously am always here to support BPD creators. Right. And the more poetry I read from people like you, the more I feel connected to poetry and writing just overall.
Oh, that's so kind.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful, connecting and seemingly simple. I'm sure it's not simple for like, you know what I mean? I'm sure there's 100,000 things that you've written that you don't like and that there's only a few that end up in the world. But you do it so well and so beautifully. And I'm just curious, like, what has creativity and writing been for your journey and your wellness?
Yeah, creativity is huge. I think for the part of my life where I wasn't on medication, it was really a means of survival. Like it was a way to deal with my feelings and process them and make them into something. And at least like as a kid or like as a teenager, like it was just such a healing thing for me. I've always just loved writing, and I've always really just written about my experiences. And especially as I got older and learned more about poets that wrote about mental health and talked about it in an open way, I understood that that could be something that my career could look like. It's been huge. I don't really write as much these days. I do more like kind of like marketing writing and stuff like that. But there was a big chunk of my life where it was really a means of survival. And it really helped me stay around. Yeah.
I love the marketing thing too. I think that's also awesome and like such an important skill set. I'm curious when you write. So I think in Tulips, you don't talk about BPD specifically.
No.
But it's so funny. So many of these poetry collections of super feelers out there, like they don't say BPD, but I'm like, obviously this like, well, if I resonate with this experience greatly. I'm curious, like, was it scary to publish this first collection? Did it come super naturally? Like, what was the process leading up to that?
Yeah, so both of my books, I have another collection
Oh,
called Using a Spoon as a Knife. Both of them were written actually during my time at U of T. I was like an English major, but one of my minors was in creative writing. So yeah, I did like some poetry workshops and basically wrote those two books during each workshop. And yeah, I think tulips, yeah, it did honestly come pretty naturally. Hospitalization and mental health was just something I was dealing with a lot. So it was pretty natural to write about it and process it in that way. It has been scary at times, like sharing it with folks and especially people that like know you really well or like are
yeah.
part of your life or like, it can be hard to really like just show, your deepest, darkest thoughts sometimes to them through this art. But it's been a healing thing overall. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it is such a different feeling to share with the people that you know best versus
Yeah.
sharing with strangers on the internet or in a book club or whatever, right?
Right.
Um, have you run into any negative repercussions of sharing, or has it all been pretty positively received?
In terms of reception of the book, it's been pretty positive. I don't think I really dealt with too many issues. I feel like the issues that have come up around my BPD have been more like extended family. I've had some like
Hmm.
stigma and stuff and encountered it that way, but not necessarily directly related to my writing. If anything, the writing has helped me connect with people. And like when I go and perform or read my work, people will come up to me after and like share their mental health journeys and like tell me about their stories, and like that's been really healing as well, like as kind of like a collective way to heal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't do like spoken word or anything, but I
Yeah,
do a lot of like presentations
yeah,
and it's my favorite part now to have people
yeah,
at the end come up and be like, I've never told anyone this, but
right,
XYZ. And you're like, thank you for sharing your story with me. Like, that is
yeah,
I do not take that for granted. It's
absolutely,
so connecting.
yeah.
Can I ask about the stigma that you've experienced with your family? I'm very curious.
Yeah, I won't go into detail, but
Hmm.
there's just some folks in my family that have, said some really hurtful things about my mental health journey. Basically, that I wasn't trying to get better, that I, had received all of this help and, I wasn't improving at the rate that they thought I should be improving. And yeah, it's been really challenging to the point where like I'm no contact with like certain people in my extended family because of the stigma that I've encountered. But it's all part of the journey, and I've learned, I guess about boundary setting and understanding that there's certain people that maybe I don't want to have in my life for certain reasons. To do a stigma, and yeah, it's been challenging, but I'm in an okay place with it now. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you're in a good place with it. I think there's so much, at least like, how do I word this?
Mhm.
Society, in my experience, because I'm no contact with a number of my family members for
Right.
similar reasons.
Right.
And I find there's so much stigma or so much like, ugh, I'm not saying this well. So much societal pressure to have relationships with blood family that when you make those boundaries, people judge you for the boundaries that you're setting.
Absolutely.
And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not the person that you should be judging.
Right.
Like, if we're going to judge anyone here, it should be the person that made me have to set up these boundaries as a self
Right.
protection mechanism because
Exactly.
of their negative views of me or my mental health or my journey or my
Right.
lack of attempt to get better or whatever it is, right?
Right.
I'm sure we've all experienced that type of stigma from family in the past, but it's just such an interesting experience to have to make those boundaries
It is.
because
Yeah.
it's such an important thing for wellness and people judge us for it. It's like, okay, well, you can't have it both ways, right?
Yeah. It's
You
really
either want me to be
complex.
working on myself or you don't, and me working on myself is having these boundaries.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so important.
Your Instagram page, you creativity on the borderline, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
I was
yeah.
like, there's so many. I'm like, there's so many Instagram handles that I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I? am I getting it right? I'll obviously I'll tag it, and I'll also tag links to the 2 collections as well. But what has been sharing online been like for you? Has any, like, what does that mean for you? Why do you do it?
Yeah, whether it's online or in person, I just try to be open about my mental health journey because there was a very long period of my life where I didn't want to talk about it to anyone. I didn't
Mhm.
want anyone to know that I was struggling with my mental health. I was very deeply ashamed of it. I would deny it if someone would, try to tell me to get treatment or to mention that I suggested I might have mental health issues. And I do it because I try to be kind of the person that I wish I had to look to, or, to
Mhm.
be that person for someone, to see that it's okay to talk about your mental health, that it's, something that can be healing even, and yeah, that can just help. It really just helps others, like, when I see other people talking about their mental health, I find it so empowering, and I find it so powerful. And like different writers that I've followed throughout my life, I just find their work so meaningful. So I just try to do something similar, and hopefully by starting those conversations and being open about my mental health, then yeah, like we talked about, other people maybe might share with us or might feel more confident doing so in their daily lives. So that's kind of why I try to speak about it as much as possible. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, I'm so glad you do. It's such important work. I did not ask you this in advance, so you can say no. Do you have any poetry that you'd like to read for the episode that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think there's one that might be helpful. Yeah, so in my second collection, there was actually a series of poems that I wrote using the DSM-5. Um, and basically, I took my various diagnoses and repurposed the language of the DSM-5, kind of hoping to do it in a creative way. I'll just read the BPD one. I guess that's the most applicable. Yeah, so it's basically just me rearranging or reordering various parts of the diagnosis. So yeah, I'll just read it out loud. So it's called BPD, and then in brackets, borderline personality disorder. It starts: emptiness, neediness, idealization and devaluation, unstable emotional experiences, frequent mood changes, emotions that are easily aroused, intense, and or out of proportion to events and circumstances. Intense feelings of nervousness, tenseness, or panic, often in reaction to interpersonal stresses, worry about the negative effects of past unpleasant experiences and future negative possibilities. Feeling fearful, apprehensive, or threatened by uncertainty, fears of falling apart or losing control. Fears of rejection by and or separation from significant others, associated with fears of excessive dependency and complete loss of autonomy. Frequent feelings of being down, miserable, and or hopeless, difficulty recovering from such moods, pessimism about the future, pervasive shame, feelings of inferior self-worth, thoughts of suicide and suicidal behavior. Acting on the spur of the moment in response to immediate stimuli, acting on a momentary basis without a plan or consideration of outcomes, difficulty establishing or following plans, a sense of urgency and self-harming behavior under emotional distress. Engagement in dangerous, risky, and potentially self-damaging activities, unnecessarily and without regard to consequences. Lack of concern for one's limitations, and denial of the reality of personal danger. So that's the poem, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
No
So that's in
problem.
your second collection, which is the using a spoon as a
A
knife.
spoon is a knife, yeah.
When did that one come out?
I think it was during COVID. It was only ever released online, so I believe it was 2020. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I was like,
Yeah.
how do I not have that one? But if
Yeah,
it was
no, I
only
totally
released
would have shared
online,
it.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. I was gonna say, like, mail it to me, but our postal service is not gonna allow that anyways. So,
I can send you a
okay,
copy, no
yeah,
problem. Yeah,
I
I
would
can give
love
you a
that.
PDF. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be so great, because just to see how you've done that with other diagnoses would be really fascinating as well. So,
Well, thank you.
yeah. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you were particularly interested in sharing today?
I think the only thing that came up talking about addiction, one thing that's been really helpful in my journey is there's an app called Reframe. I just wanted to share what it's called because for a lot of people, 12 steps don't necessarily mesh with their style of however they like to heal or how they like to connect with folks. So personally, like coming from a religious background, I didn't resonate with 12-step ideology. So I just wanted to throw that out there. There is it's basically like a neuroscience based program that's secular, and I found it really helpful. There's a lot of group meetings like Zoom calls and stuff like that, and they give you little like daily lessons and things. So that's just a tool that I wanted to throw out there because I just kind of found it on by accident, and it's been really powerful for me.
Yeah, I'm so happy you shared that because 12 step works so well for some people, right? Like it's everything to some people, but I would find it really difficult as somebody who isn't religious and isn't necessarily like a higher power. I know you don't have to be like, it's not a Christian necessarily religion based thing, but that would be really hard for me. Have you tried 12 step and just it didn't work?
Yeah, I have tried 12-step. I also tried, I think it's called Smart Recovery.
Yes,
I believe I've tried that one. It wasn't bad, that one. I just really resonated more with the reframe approach. I honestly I go to like at least 4 meetings a week. Like I try to go very often. And it's really helped with getting sober again. Yeah.
Nice. So the Reframe app has meetings, like virtual ones?
Exactly. Yeah. You have to pay, I think it's like $13.99 US a month. And then you get access to all these community meetings, like multiple per day. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. And so you said that you grew up religious, but you're no longer. Is that?
Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah.
I'm curious, like, was there anything that prompted that change?
I just personally never really resonated with, like, I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school my whole life. And I'm also queer. That's also a big part of my identity. And obviously those two things don't always go hand in hand.
Not quite aligned in their philosophy.
So it was challenging being in that environment and being closeted, and another thing I really didn't want to talk about for a very long time. But so I think it was more tied to queer identity that kind of didn't mesh well for me.
Yeah. Did you find growing up Catholic and going to Catholic school was hard in relation to your emotions as well? Or was it more about the queerness, which obviously there are so many things to explore when it comes to Catholicism and and being queer. But just curious, like, is it, I did not grow up religious at all. Like I went to church a bit and then they told me I couldn't read Harry Potter and I was like, nah, I'm good.
You're like, I'm good.
Yeah, thanks. But it wasn't Catholicism. It was, I don't even know, like probably, I don't know, some chiller, something chiller in a school basement or whatever. But like how does that resonate presumably growing up with really strong emotions, probably some childhood stuff that had happened, and then having this kind of religion background to all of it?
Yeah, I guess with a big part of Catholicism is like almost a shame aspect. So I don't know. I guess there was various parts of my identity that I felt shame about, and I don't think the Catholicism necessarily helped. I don't know how directly related they were, but it was definitely like a culture where you didn't talk about certain things, and like you kept a lot of stuff inside, and at least the way I experienced it. And it really didn't resonate with me, didn't really work for me personally. But I think it was challenging in multiple ways.
Oh, I have no doubt. And just the queer experience, trying to decide whether or not you're going to come out and have this level of shame and just like organizational hatred towards you. How did your family deal with that? Like you coming out as queer, if they know?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I came out like early 20s ish. Okay. My family, it was a little challenging. my mom is from El Salvador, so she was raised in a very different culture. So when I came out as, I initially used the term bisexual. I do use that term as well, but I prefer queer. That identity, it was like literally something she had never really encountered or had to understand, like if I had said I was a lesbian, she would have been like, that's great. Like, good for you, honey.
Right.
Like, whatever.
Yeah.
But because I said I was bi, it was a little challenging. She didn't really think it was a real thing. She thought maybe I just didn't want to come out as a lesbian, and that's how I really felt, or so it took several months, like, for my mom to kind of come around, and I really don't fault her on that because it's such a cultural difference. But yeah, it was difficult in the moment to have that kind of reaction. But yeah, my parents are very supportive, regardless of who I date. I'm very blessed to, be in a family where I wasn't disowned or anything like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
I feel very grateful for that. Yeah.
And I'm gathering that they're aware of your mental health issues as well.
They are. Like I mentioned, when I was around 6 or 7, they took me to get help. I think it was with a psychologist or something. And then while I was a teenager, there was at least 1 or 2 times where they did take me to the hospital because of the suicidal ideation, and they were trying to get me to get help. But I guess, for a lot of people too, like, you have to really want that help for the healing to usually happen. So it wasn't until maybe a little later that once I was able to accept it and embrace the treatment and stuff, that I had more change and growth. Yeah.
That's the thing about, I don't know, is this a BC law that they were coming? I think it was a BC law. Anyways, They were thinking about doing like more involuntary treatment for children because of the overdose crisis.
Okay.
And as a person who went to a lot of like counseling because I was told I had to go when I was a kid, and like I went to anger management counseling, even though like anger management wasn't my problem. It was BPD and intense emotions. I feel exactly the same way, where it's like you have to want the help and like want to change. And so it's hard when you're a kid and you're being essentially like forced to do something. But also, I think there is a component of like, if you were really suicidal, maybe it was able to help you stay alive for that period of time until you could get to that point. A kid and you don't want the help, or you don't feel like you need the help, or it's not the help that you want, like how beneficial is that in the end? We're both lucky to have supportive parents that even tried to get us help, but it is more difficult to change when you're not in the mood or desire to do so. And now they're pretty supportive about it.
They are, yeah. I'm when I get really in that heightened state, I like shut down and try not to let people in, and that's something I still need to work on. But if I let them in, they would definitely be there. It's just that at times I have a hard time letting them in. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think my last question is usually like, what's your favorite part about BPD? What's your favorite part about being a super feeler? Do you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah. I guess with BPD, I guess the intensity can be good or it can be bad, depending on what type of intensity it is. But there is a lot of beauty in being able to feel things deeply and to experience life in a I guess more intense way than some folks might. And yeah, it's been a big part of my life. Using my mental health journey in combination with my writing has been like just a really powerful thing. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to, share about my mental health openly and to have other people resonate with that and connect with that. And to hear from other folks and their journeys, I think has been, just a really powerful thing. The intensity I think can go either way, but there are some really beautiful moments of feeling things deeply as well. So.
Totally. That's the dialectic, right?
Absolutely.
Pros and cons.
Absolutely.
There's never one way or the other. Totally. It's not black and white. So, although my emotions sometimes feel very red and black and white. But yeah, totally. Amazing. Well, it was so nice to chat with you. I feel like we've been like talking online for so many years and like haven't really like actually gotten a chance to chat. So Thank you so much for coming on the show. If I'm ever in your area, I will let you know.
Thank
And
you.
same with you. If you're
Of
ever, do you ever
course.
come to BC?
I've never been, but I would love to. Yeah.
Oh, no way. Yeah, I don't live close to Vancouver. I
Okay.
live like an hour and a bit away, so
Okay.
I'm not. If I lived like downtown Vancouver, I'd be like, come stay
Yeah.
with me. But I live a little too far for that to be helpful. But yeah, if you're ever out this way, let me know, and I'll do the
Yeah.
same. And yeah,
Thanks for having
amazing.
me.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for listening to the Super Feeler podcast. This episode was recorded on the unceded traditional territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. If you are interested in learning more about the show, please feel free to follow us on social media. Our Instagram handle is the Super Feeler. That'll be also linked in the show notes. We also have a Patreon page where you can get all sorts of bonus content. We've got bonus episodes, video episodes, lots of resources, journal articles, all sorts of stuff. So you're going to absolutely love being on Patreon with us. There's also free memberships in addition to paid ones, so please feel free to join that. That's patreon.com/superfeeler. If you're looking for information regarding the Super Feelers Club, which is the peer support group that I mentioned in the show, please feel free to Google or look at laurieedmondson.com for information and registration.